When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were waiting for him. Just then came a man named Jairus, a leader of the synagogue. He fell at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, who was dying. As Jesus went, the crowds pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who'd been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, and though she'd spent all she had on physicians, no one could cure her. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Then Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and press in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I noticed that power had gone out from me." When the woman saw that she could not remain hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she'd been immediately healed. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." That story comes from St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 8. Imagine if you were watching a fire engine or an ambulance rushing to some emergency with the lights going and the siren blaring, and then suddenly it screeched to a halt outside a house, and the driver leant out of the window and said to the householder, "I really like what you've done with your front garden." You think, what's going on? This is an emergency. You haven't got time to stop. Yet Jesus stopped on the way to an emergency, to a dying child. I should say, by the way, if you're not familiar with the story, that the child survived, healed by Jesus. But on the way to Jairus' daughter, there's this other moment when a woman touches Jesus' clothing and he knows, he understands, even though she's too ashamed because of her ritual impurity in the eyes of her religion to even come to him and ask for help. I love the idea that Jesus notices, that nothing escapes his attention. It shouldn't surprise us. He told us to pray in secret and that we would be seen when we prayed. You might remember when he greeted Nathanael and said, "I saw you when you were praying under the tree before you met me." But somehow, even religious people forget about that attention that God gives us. There's a modern phrase, it's kind of phrase that sets some people's teeth on edge, which says, "You're seen." In other words, what is happening in your life or the things you're trying to do, even if you feel forgotten about, we understand. We see you. Well, God sees us and hears us and notices us. And I find that all the more powerful because just a chapter before, Luke has told us about the woman who came to Jesus while he was in a Pharisee's house and wept and anointed his feet with oil and then cleaned his feet with her hair and completely prostrated herself in a sense of someone who needed forgiveness and hope. And the Pharisees tut-tutted and said to each other, "Well, he's no prophet. Otherwise he'd know what kind of woman she is, a sinful woman touching him." But Jesus received her touch, her worship, and commended her in a way he couldn't commend his hosts with all their hypocrisy and false piety. He says to her, "Your faith has made you well." And so now this woman, who's had the courage and desperation to touch his garments, actually finds healing, and in the same way is acceptable to God. All around us here in St Mary's Conwy, in fact, on my shoulder right now, are these wonderful butterflies. I'm sure you know it's a project we've had over these last months where people can write a prayer or a memory or a thought to do with the pandemic, and then they're turned into these butterflies. Now there are hundreds of them. I'm sure that many of the people who've responded to that invitation and the children in our schools wouldn't call themselves Christians or perhaps religious in any conventional way. And that makes this all the more appropriate Because what we're saying publicly is whatever's in your heart, whatever hurts or hopes or aspirations you're living with in this really vulnerable time for the whole world, give them to God. Turn them into this fragile symbol, because God will allow himself to be touched by you. You're so important that he'll even stop in the middle of an emergency and notice you. There can be no greater affirmation of our worth as human beings than to be worth the attention of God's love. And we are. So I invite you now to touch the garment of God, to reach out, especially if you don't feel good enough or holy enough to do so, or if the prayer or aspiration you offer is one you expect to be rejected. God is not like some complex benefit system or asylum system designed by those who created it to be hostile and to exclude those who need help most. However much those who work within the system might be good people doing their best. God's not like that. He sent his Son into the world to save us, and he's ready now to hear your prayer. So close your eyes, reach out, and touch him. Amen.